Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. First, I just want to thank everyone for being present tonight. Certainly my role is tonight to listen and to gain a more well-rounded perspective into the concerns that are arising out of the Baltimore School for the Arts community, and quite frankly, over the past several years. I want to be as supportive of you all as possible, but I do want to make sure that our staff has an opportunity to talk with folks, but also I really want to hear and I want to listen to make sure that we have a well-rounded perspective as we're moving forward with all of you, especially the young people. So I just want to say to our students, this is an opportunity for you to raise your voice. And I do, understand the frustration of several folks who weren't able to join. And so to Chief Davis's point, I do recommend that we schedule another opportunity for other community members that may have experienced some ambiguity with logging in, to make sure that we can also raise their voices and elevate their concerns and their perspectives as well. So I'm here as a support to the young people, to our staff, and to the greater community. And I really want to make sure that we hear the voices from those of you that are present. So I don't want to take up too much time because I know that we're already late, but just know that I am here and I'm here to support everyone. And I look forward to the next meeting as well that we're going to schedule for other members of our community.
Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. Before we get to the agenda, I realize I did not introduce myself. My name is John Davis. I'm the Chief of Schools for Baltimore City Public Schools. I've been a teacher and a principal here in the district, and at the current position as Chief of Schools, what that means is that principals through their principal supervisor report to me, and I sit on the CEO's cabinet. The agenda that we're going to go through is to go through the process that we are going through as a district or as central office to review the previous allegations. So we'll go through that somewhat in detail so that you can understand the level that we are taking this. The second thing we're going to do is kind of review some of the recent revisions that have occurred with respect to Title IX and sexual harassment policies. There's been some items that have been brought up with respect to making sure that we have a safe learning environment, specifically around different parts of the building that might be less safe than others. So we want to address that. We're also going to put an advisory committee together. So we'll talk through that for just a minute. And then we'll get to questions, feedback, and sharing concerns. And at the very end, there's some additional information I'll provide, but that additional information has already been provided with respect to counseling that we're providing to anyone that needs it. But we just want to reiterate some of the things we've already sent out. So that'll be the agenda. We'll go through this. We'll get to number 5, as that will be the majority of the meeting with the questions, feedback, and sharing concerns. I want to go ahead and start by reviewing really what we are doing, specifically our Department of Fair Practices. Most people don't know that this department exists. It really exists for 2 main reasons. One of them is they have EEO concerns, which is really equal employment opportunity concerns, and they also do investigations. Title IX is a part of this. We follow the board policy, which is JBB, and administrative regulation JBB-RA. But it is the Department of Fair Practices that is going to review the allegations, review the cases here in the next probably about 6 weeks. And we'll talk a little bit about a timeline and how we'll follow up with the community here in just a minute. So when you take a look at what our Department of Fair Practices, frankly, is doing already, but this is what they will continue to do, it really falls into two buckets and then a summary at the end. There is a review of the allegations that have been previously reported, and then we will investigate anything new that has occurred. One of the things that I want to point out here is really the second point under number 1, right? As we are reviewing, previous sexual misconduct allegations, not only are we reviewing it to make sure that we had the right consequences, review, but what we are really also looking at is the process for handling the complaints. I feel like that is a decent amount of what we've heard. We've heard that, right, how these were processed or how these were handled. We're going to take a really deep look into that. And you can see an email address there. We have put that email address there because if there is additional information around the handling of the complaints, we need to hear that. Quite honestly, there's been a lot of the information we have is anonymous, and it makes it really hard. And so not only are we taking a look at the cases, but the handling of them. And again, I just want to point that out because that is part of, I feel like, the feedback that we've gotten from the school community and the students in particular. So that's a really big point with respect to this. For number 2, as we're going to investigate anything that is new, I also want to point out that we will have to collaborate with law enforcement. Sometimes we get questions around, right, do we have to get law enforcement involved? Especially, right, under this, right, under the current societal issues that we have with respect to law enforcement. I can understand that, but I want to be very clear that if we have to get law enforcement involved, we have to do that, and we have to follow exactly what those procedures are. We've just heard some feedback that's like people would rather law enforcement not be involved, but I want to be very clear that if we have to, then we will do that. And that is just part of how we have to move in this space. What you also see for number 3 is that we are committing to providing a summary by the end of the school year. In doing that, we have to be very consistent with student privacy. We have to be very consistent with personnel laws, but we do feel like we have to get back with that. And all of that is really the main things that our Department of Fair Practices is going to go through. I think maybe I'll point out one other point, which is the last one in number 2, right? If there are any remedial measures, including discipline for students and staff, then we will take a look at that and we'll take any action that we have to. I feel like that is also a decent amount of the feedback that we've received. But again, we have to look at it case by case and go through them. I also want to take a second and talk through recent revisions to the sexual harassment policies. Right, this is something that has occurred recently with our Board of School Commissioners as they updated the policy. In the end, right, it's allowed us to ensure that we've got streamlined reporting and investigation protocols. We provide a fair process for complainants. And you'll see that language in here. The complainants are the individuals who experience sexual harassment, and the respondents as well, individuals who have alleged to have perpetrated the sexual harassment. So you'll see those terms from time to time in a couple of these slides. And we also had to just align it with federal regulations as well. The other thing that has been in process is making sure that we update and do even more with our training. And that's what you see at the end, right? To promote this policy and to make sure that it sticks. We've got to have really good training for staff at all of our schools, including BSA. And again, these are very recent sexual harassment policies and procedures, and we're updating things accordingly. When it comes to reporting sexual harassment, I want to be clear with everyone about how it can go about, right? It can happen in person or in writing, really with any city school staff. Any school staff member are mandated reporters, and they have to follow up on it. Additionally, right, you can use the bullying or the harassment reporting forms. It can be done in paper or online, or it can be reported directly to the Department of Fair Practices. Just like it says, all city school staff members are mandated reporters, right? If a staff member receives a report directly, right, they must do the following things: ensure that the bullying or the harassment form is submitted, or fill out the form, and report it directly to the school principal. It's the principal or the designee that then gives that to the Department of Fair Practices. So there's a number of different ways. The thing I really want to get across, though, is the very first point up there, right? Even though we talk about forms and we talk about the Department of Fair Practices, this is really about if it is brought up really to anyone, right? Staff members are mandated reporters, and they have to go ahead and submit that. I want to talk just for a second around the investigating sexual harassment cases, right? It's the Title IX coordinator that's going to do this in collaboration with school staff, and they began to do this already. The complainant and respondent should always be interviewed separately. Again, I feel like at times that's a question that comes up. Should the complainant and respondent be there together? No, they should not. They should be interviewed separately. We also do everything to maintain confidentiality, right? At the very end, you can see that retaliation is prohibited. We have to make sure that we're not sharing confidential information in this situation. At times, law enforcement referral, for instance, has to happen. I said this earlier, I'm just reiterating it here. The other thing, though, is once a harassment case begins, there's also non-disciplinary, non-punitive services, providing counseling, safety plans, and that just isn't when the investigation is done, right? It should be when it's pending, afterwards, whenever it's appropriate. After the investigation, though, there could also be remedial measures. There could be individual level responses as long as it's consistent with our student code of conduct. And there could also be school or system-wide actions, training, restorative practices. There could be some type of action that we take as a system. So again, that happens at the end of the investigation. Could be individual things, and there could be school or school-wide actions. In those situations at the end, though, the final determinations can be appealed to the CEO's designee and then also to the board. Again, the retaliation being prohibited, I just want to be very clear about that. Any student sharing, anybody sharing confidential information about an investigation, that is absolutely prohibited, regardless of who it's around. So everything I talked about previously was about the investigation and really the processes that we are putting in place, again, by Department of Fair Practices. I'm going to switch just a little bit and talk about the steps to ensure a safe learning environment. There's just been some feedback, again, that we have received around camera placement and potential areas of the school which might be less safe than others. right? And again, this is in response to some of the feedback we've already received. And if we need to do that within the building, then these are the kind of two areas that have bubbled up more so than others. If there are others that come up, again, we'll talk about an advisory committee here in a minute. If there are other areas that bubble up with respect to a safe learning environment, then we will tackle those as well.
Dr. Davis, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just noticing there's a lot going on in the chat. There are students in the chat, and someone needs to moderate this. As an educator, I'm looking at it wanting to jump in. So can someone just acknowledge that there's stuff going on and at least give them some guidelines into when they can speak? Because there's a lot happening that people are ignoring.
Yeah,
I think he was pretty clear that when they were gonna have a chance to talk. They just need to be calm and let him talk, say what he's gonna say, and just be patient.
I apologize for not saying that initially. I did say it during the agenda. We will get to all the questions that people have.
Yeah, Chief, we're monitoring them, and so when you're done and we get to that part, we're planning to repeat the questions so that you can respond to them.
I'm sorry, but with all due respect, I understand that usually in these situations you need to have patience, but I think that in this position, you are not in the place to tell a bunch of angry students to be patient. So you have to understand.
I'm a parent and I'm a father, and I'm telling you, if my kid was doing what you guys are doing, it's very disrespectful. So just chill out.
Well, I'm not your kid, so you chill out.
Thank goodness.
So let's not go there. Like, honestly, this is one community.
This
I
hope you know my father is in this meeting.
So we will get to the questions, I promise, and I will stay as long as I need to. And if asking for patience comes across as disrespectful to anyone, I don't mean for it to. There's really not a lot. There's only a couple more things we need to get to before we open it up. Again, part of our work here is we're going to form an advisory committee. And the goal is to provide recommendations by August 13 to the incoming principal around school culture and any needed resources, support, or programming. I want to thank the two Baltimore School for the Arts School Family Council co-chairs, Ms. Pilla and Ms. Green, for taking up the offer. And we'll also have Dr. Kim Sollers, who will be working with the two of them. We want the committee to be composed of students, parents, staff members, community members. And again, we want to make recommendations to the new principal as that new principal begins.
So this is a parent. I'm going to say I feel a little bit like kicked in the gut by the family council, both chairs. It was confirmed in our last parent meeting that students would be able to take the lead. You don't have a student on the lead. And, you know, I mean, we are one family at BSA. We're supposed to be empowering and supporting these students, and the family co-chairs are taking the lead on the committee. It's really disappointing.
I appreciate that feedback. It is something I had not heard. I really wanted to get a parent and a staff.
This is why the students need to be in charge of running this meeting, figuring out the meetings, not the family parent group. They kind of just came in and started to do too much. It really needs to be the parents taking the lead. And North Avenue has a responsibility of who you're talking to. I mean, you know who's on the Instagram page. And Trish and Anna, I know this was probably meant well, you had good intentions, but I think it was pretty clear in the family meeting that you needed to support the students, not come in as adults and take over this process, which is really kind of what it looks like.
All right, let's go to the next slide. And we're at questions, feedback, and concerns. There are at least two hands up. I see Sydney and Ruth's hand up. So let's start there. And then if I can get help in the chat with where to go from there, we can keep going. Sydney?
Hi, I'm one of the moderators of the Instagram account, and I'd like to ask why students have not been reached out to. Ruthie and I had a meeting just so that this is transparent to all the parents, all the students. Ruth, the other moderator of the account, and I had a meeting with the director of the Title IX department yesterday. And we do have some questions that weren't able to be answered yesterday, like what is the investigation process? At what point do our school police brought in? Because as you acknowledged, as you mentioned, a lot of students are extremely uncomfortable with police being brought into their cases, and they might not want to report because of that. And there is no transparency whatsoever of what the investigative process is. Most students didn't know there was an investigative process. Before our meeting yesterday, I had no idea. Most students don't know that the sexual assault allegations are given to North Avenue. And so what is the investigation process? How are we going to make this transparent to all of the students of what the process is, and at what point do the school police step in? Because students need to know whether or not their case will have police involvement, because they might not be comfortable with that, and that is entirely within their right.
The sexual harassment cases definitely, they go to North Avenue, they go through the process, and right, as we are reviewing case by case, right, they do go to school police. And so if there is some type of sexual harassment, right, part of that process is to go through school police, especially given the severity.
In the past, we have not had involvement of school police. And what level of sexual harassment, of sexual assault, does that count as? Is it any case of sexual assault are police brought in? And if so, is there a way that we can create new systems where that doesn't happen? Because many students aren't comfortable with that.
So I understand, because not just from you, but many people are not comfortable when law enforcement is involved. But as any type of leader in a school system, when certain cases occur, it does have to go to the police. And I can't say it any other way, Sydney. I can't say it any other way to any of the students involved.
Yeah, I'm asking which cases, because is it every case of sexual assault or sexual harassment that is reported? Is it every single one?
I believe that it is. I'm going to ask if there's anybody from North Avenue that can, or any of my colleagues that can confirm that, but I believe it is every single one of them.
Because that is something that students need to be informed of if they are going to report.
Mr. Davis, I'm sorry, would you please take the slide down so that we can see everybody in the meeting?
Sure, we can do that.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Chief Davis, this is Josh Sivan. I'm the Chief Legal Officer. I'd be happy to jump in on this point. So the important distinction in terms of a legal process is that, and we need to be sensitive to victims and people who have experience in terms of recognizing and working through with them. But if there are allegations of sexual violence and sexual assault, those are required under law to be reported. And harassment more broadly, those violence and offenses are a subset of those, and those need to be reported. That's what we're focused on. But obviously we want to take a victim-centered approach to this and work with the individuals who are courageous enough to come forward and report.
Ruth?
Hi, I have a question real quick. I was wondering if there are any, if I can.
There were people that had their hand up earlier, so I do want to try to go in the order that's on the participant list. Ruth, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So as Sydney mentioned, we met with someone from Title IX, the Title IX office yesterday, and she told us that BSA is in the place to make its own policies for some things, but this, as far as the school has let us know, they said that it's up to North Avenue to make policies. So I'm wondering, are you guys in communication with each other, or are you guys just pointing fingers?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely
slow down.
There's definitely times at schools where you can make your own policy with respect to how the school culture is, with respect to school operations. But there are, I mean, we have a board of commissioners. We have policies around sexual harassment. We have policies around discipline, and those we have to follow, and it covers all schools. And so those are the type of things that really govern everybody with respect to code of conduct, with respect to just different situations that occur with young people, especially when it comes to sexual harassment, sexual allegations. And so we're not going to be able to change that unless it goes all the way to the Board of School Commissioners. But then there are school policies, but it's a little bit more around, right, operations, how the school runs. And I think the school also can work very hard to make sure that there's a culture where things like this can be brought up, or where issues can be brought up well ahead of time. And so there are some things that are within the school's auspices, but there are other things that are governed across schools. I hope that makes sense, Ruth.
It didn't, but thank you.
The next person with the hand up is Masadi.
Hi, in part with Ruth's question, are there going to be any investigations of teachers, faculty, or staff that were mentioned on the page, not just of sexual harassment or sexual misconduct, but also of how they treated other students? Because I saw on one of your slides that there was something about how teachers and staff faculty cannot conduct sexual harassment investigations with the harasser and the person that was harassed in the same room, but I've heard that's happened a lot. And Miss Evans was one of the teachers who has done one of those things. And I was wondering, just, there's been a lot of questions about her and she hasn't really been present. I was just wondering if there are going to be any investigations.
This gets a little bit to, I think, Sydney's question. And even though I thought I explained it, I must not have done a very good job. When we look at every single case, if something was not handled well, you've called out someone, it could be someone else, it could be any adult. If something was not handled well, then yes, we will investigate that. And that's why, right, the posts and the Instagram posts are appreciated, and we also need just as much information as we can as we go into these investigations. Frankly, that's why we try to put up the email, we try to put out the information. I will tell you, is it Masadi? Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
It's really about every single case and making sure that we've handled it appropriately, both in just how it was handled and then what the final result was. And so, yes, if we think we have to, if something wasn't done well, then yes, we have to investigate it. So the short answer is yes. Nora.
Hi, so I was wondering what the timeline is in terms of implementing some of these changes.
So I would say two timelines that we put forth. One of them is to review these cases and to give folks a summary of what we found out. And I'm intentionally using the word summary because we're not going to be able to go case by case and give the details on every case. And I say that because there's confidentiality, right? In one of the slides, it talked about retaliation being prohibited. There are student privacy laws, adult privacy laws, that all of that we have to follow. And so we will review the cases and then follow up with the community on what we found out. That will happen by the end of the school year. At the same time, we want to have a group of people together, and we obviously heard that students have to be front and center for the advisory committee to recommend any changes as we get into the new school year. So that one will be, I think, probably towards August. We put an August 13th date. So those are the two timelines that we put forward.
Okay, I was talking more about like actual changes to maybe the building. I know there were discussions about cameras in the back stairwell, lighting, making parts of the building safer, and like helping out the counseling staff, stuff like that.
Yeah, I apologize, Nora. I didn't get the gist of that. So right now, we don't have a facilities timeline for it. I think what I will commit to is when we follow up with the end at the end of the school year with what we found out from the cases, when we provide that information and summarize that, we'll also talk about what we found out from a facility standpoint. So
Thank you.
Ben and Grace.
Fanon. Hi, I'm Fanon. I graduated from BSA in 2017. And something that I want to just talk about a little is just the, I really worry about the emphasis being put on investigating all of this and like making sure that all of this actually happened. And I think what that does is it places victims in a position where they're just not being believed. And I think it's important to note that even if like all of these, no matter the outcome of these investigations, there's harm that has happened. And the reason for that harm, I believe, is more systemic than anything else. And I think that the solutions to that are much more based in community and what kind of policy is being built. And I really don't think that police and law enforcement it can't be the solution here. And that's something I believe very firmly. I think that it goes in line with the same thing that investigations don't position victims and they don't center victims, and it's far more aggressive. It also targets specific people if law enforcement is getting involved in a case where there are students of color, then it's going to be disproportionate because it's systemic. And I think that that's important to note. I think that, police officers aren't trained in trauma. They're not trained in working with high schoolers. I think it just criminalizes people unnecessarily. And I think of my time at BSA and when I experienced cases of sexual harassment, a lot of it was from my peers and from people who were in my ensemble or people who I loved dearly, and I didn't want to get them in trouble. And I think that having those systems in place that force students who have been harassed or had a boundary broken, putting them in the position where they have to decide between speaking their truth and saying that harm has been caused versus potentially ruining one of their friends' lives, or not even a friend, just someone who they care about fundamentally. And shunning people from community is not the solution, I believe. That's something that I think I learned at BSA. Shout out to Maria Broom. But yeah, I think it's an important conversation to have, just what we're doing systemically that's going to change that's going to make harm unimaginable, not just getting rid of everyone who causes harm, because there's no way to do that. Harm is always going to exist. So that's what I have to say right now. That's not really a question, but.
No, but it's a great point, Fanon, and I appreciate you saying it because, right, the investigation part, I mean, what I want people to know is that we are reviewing case by case. But I feel like you brought up two really, really great points. One is it's about the school culture, and it's about how young people feel about coming into school every single day, so that, like you said, harm is unimaginable. Harm being unimaginable should maybe be the goal of the advisory committee, not to tell them or whoever is on that committee, whoever ends up becoming on the committee, but harm being unimaginable is what it should be, not just at BSA, but elsewhere. I also think that when it has occurred, the emphasis has to be about how do we work with folks so that any type of services or support that folks need, that in the cases of the Instagram posts, right, the victims need, that we do that and we do that well. There's a lot of good in what you just said. And I think in my presentation about all the investigation, what I'm really trying to say is we are trying to take those things seriously, but you're right, it's way deeper than that, and it's way more important on a day-by-day basis. So I think we should take some of those points to heart to make sure that harm is unimaginable. It might be a lofty goal, but it's the right one.
Can I say something? I can't figure out where to push the button to raise my hand. I don't want to jump the line.
Yeah, there is a decent amount of people in front of you.
Okay,
But I'll try to remember. It was Nina. Luna.
Hello. I had a question as to how will you guys sort of give me a second, the wording isn't coming to my head properly right now. If you are involving police in all cases, how will you sort of not make it feel like those police are there just watching or staring or being in general threatening, because a lot of people feel threatened by the police. So how will you manage to involve police without involving something that people feel threatened by and deterred by?
So first we should say that a number of the cases have already occurred, and our investigation is really around how was it handled? Did we do the right thing? What do we have to do differently? If there are new cases, right, and I think in some of the Instagram posts, right, that is what we are going through, is to make sure that anything is new, right? When I say police have to know about it, that doesn't mean that they are right front and center. And right, a type of report might have to go to the police, but in the end, right, they're not going to be front and center with the investigation. Josh, you might want to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that I want to make sure that people know that the normal investigation doesn't put them as front and center as I feel like we're talking about.
100% agree. The report is important, but we want to work to make sure, and I think there are really good points from Fanon and others about how to support and move forward in a way that is consistent with what Chief Davis was saying.
Rachel Tyler.
Hello, I'm Kara. I'm actually Rachel's mother. And first I wanted to thank the students who've put all of this together, especially Ruthie and Sydney. I know how hard you've been working for your peers and to make sure that everyone is heard. And we as parents, We hear that and we appreciate it, and we're so glad that you're on their side. I wanted to express some frustration that I'm hearing so many of the same things that were said to me 30 years ago when we were experiencing being touched or being harassed or being talked to. And once again, 30 years later, the only people in positions of power who are willing to speak to us are men. I really don't want to listen to men talk about what it's like for young women to experience sexual harassment. I would like to see women in positions of power. I would like to see our women staff members, our trans staff members, our queer staff members, our people of color stepping forward and taking these positions of power, or better yet, being given those positions of power that are the same as they were when I was in high school in the early 90s. And I don't mean to say you're doing a bad job. I'm just saying that there are things that need to change, and there are perspectives from those of us who have lived this, who that need to be the people in power, the people making those decisions. And one of my examples of that is that there seems to be a misunderstanding between sexual harassment and sexual assault. They are different things. Sexual assault often requires that it be, I believe always requires that it be reported to the police, but sexual harassment doesn't. And whether or not it's one or the other is up to the discretion of the administrator who's dealing with the issue. So one of the issues that I have heard when I was in high school, now that my child is in high school, is that it was only a joke. I would appreciate it if one of the men in power could tell me an example of a rape joke that is appropriate to tell in the school. And if you can't, I would like to see every student who tries to make one automatically suspended.
I know you were Rachel's mother. I was just going to say thank you, Miss Tyler. Is it Tyler?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
And John, I'm happy to jump in here for a minute just to say that I'm Allison Perkins-Cohen. I'm Chief of Staff of City Schools, and I'm here as well. There's a team of us who have been looking at this and responding to this. That includes women, men, women of color, people of color that have all been thinking about how to respond to this and how to make sure we hear students' voice. And the cultural pieces that people are talking about. There's the kind of investigative pieces that we have to address, and how do we actually deal with the harm that may have been caused by the way investigations occurred and by the incidents, and how we respond to that, as well as addressing the overall cultural issues that many people have raised that we're aware of, and I think also link back to some of the conversations that happened in the last year about some of the racial tensions and so on. So we have to think about all those pieces together when we're talking about some of the cultural issues that we need to address at BSA. And frankly, we're thinking about it at all of our high schools. So
thank you, Allison. I just, from a parental point of view, it would have meant quite a bit to me if you were to lead part of this meeting, so that we had representation not only of the population that tends to perpetrate these crimes, but the population that tends to be the victim of these crimes. And I don't mean 100%. I'm not trying to vilify men. I'm married to one. He's sitting right over here. Mm-hmm. But I do think that hearing your voice even just now means a lot to me personally, and I'm sure it does to our students.
Well, I appreciate that, and I probably should have jumped in earlier. We're all trying to juggle multiple things, and I was on another meeting in the beginning of this, so I appreciate that. But you know, I think that the work that we've done to really think collaboratively as a team about how to handle situations like this, and try to make sure we're hearing student voice. And I see the chat too, and I know that there's a lot of feelings among students that we have to make sure we're trying to continue to keep engaging and effectively listening to, because there's a lot of hurt feelings out there that we need to hear and respond to. So we are working on that, and I think the advisory council will be a big part of that, and part of our ongoing work to make sure students are feeling more heard and validated through the process.
Thank you.
Paz?
Hi, yeah, this is coming from someone who was sexually assaulted at Baltimore School for the Arts. I'm gonna ask my question and keep talking and then have the answer, but how are the students or staff gonna be punished? Because I'm not going to say the name of the student due to if their parents are there potentially suing for liability. But how are they going to be punished? Because I was indecently exposed, I was sexually assaulted, and harassed, and not every I said that, but if the student, and I have talked to Tom Askey about this, but if the student isn't expelled at the least and have it on his personal record, I will be taking this further, because this is not something that should be handled lightly.
So yeah, it's not going to be taken lightly, Paz, and I don't know if your specific situation has been reviewed or not. If it hasn't, then it will go through the full process. If it has been reviewed, then we're going to look and make sure that whatever actions we took were appropriate. You're asking me about what the actions are going to be, and I can't tell you that without getting into the details, but we will follow exactly what our code of conduct says. And I appreciate you stepping forward and saying that, because we've got to handle every situation appropriately, delicately where needed, but appropriately. Sydney.
Hi, first question. Do you have documentation of the past cases being properly reported to school police and to North Avenue? Do you know if the school in the past did report them correctly?
I have not seen all of the cases, and that's why we're looking through all of them, and that's why we will give a summary. I know I've seen a number of them that were appropriately, I shouldn't say appropriately, I know that they were reported as disciplinary issues, and really that's what we have to look at case by case. So I know that, I'll just say some of them were, I just don't know if all of them were, and I don't have the details on every single one right now. That's why we need the next, I don't know, and end of the school year is about 8 weeks away. That's why we need the next 8 weeks to look over them all.
And this advisory committee that you've been talking about, will students be reached out to in order to be a part of this committee?
Yes.
Okay. And then also, we've been talking a lot about past cases. Where do students fit in creating and changing future policies? Ruthie and I have been doing a lot of work recently to look at the current policy. We've been looking at ideas for other policies. We've been talking to a lot of survivors on what justice is to them, what makes them feel safe in school. And it seems as though there is a disconnect between student survivors and the ones that are creating these policies. So where do those lines overlap in order for future policies to be created? Because what Ruth mentioned earlier is that the school has expressed that everything has been handed over. And North Avenue you guys have expressed that there are policies in both the school's hands and in North Avenue's hands. So when we're looking at this, what level do these changes fit into, and how are you guys going to make sure that the changes students feel is important are implemented and are heard? Because so far we haven't had any sort of communication as to what students think these policies should look like and what makes them feel safe in school. Because what we're seeing is that we're going back in person soon. Many students are already going back in person, but a lot don't feel safe going back to school. And this is much more urgent than the timeline is alluding to.
John, can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
So I think we definitely welcome student input on the policies that we have in place. We think part of the advisory group would be, and a large part of it is to hear from students, both in terms of the immediate safety of the school community at BSA and how you would make that school community safer, as well as input on your points about how do you make, do the policies reflect, input from students in terms of whether you think that the policies are appropriate. And so that should absolutely be a piece of it. We do try for the broader kind of code of conduct, say, in terms of the appropriate actions that follow or appropriate penalties that follow student actions. Those are consistent across schools because we have to make sure there's consistency in terms of how we hold students accountable for behavior across schools. But if the way we're holding students accountable is not appropriate and students have a voice in that, we would definitely be open to hearing student feedback about that so we can continue to look at those policies and make changes to them if they're feeling that they're not representative of the student experience in BSA and other schools.
Yeah, Ruth and I have talked to students at other schools. There are sexual assault pages created for other schools recounting similar experiences, and it's become increasingly obvious that this is not just a BSA issue. And while BSA certainly has kind of an outstanding issue, especially in terms of administration, this is a large problem across the board. So what is North Avenue going to do to make sure that we have students not only from BSA, students from schools all over the place that are changing these policies because they're not working. And yesterday we were told that they were changed in January. We went back and looked at these policies and they're not a lot different and they are not working. So when is this going to, kind of when are students going to be directly involved? How are students going to be directly involved? Because we can't fit all students on the advisory committee. So how will students have direct input?
So you are absolutely right that this is an issue that extends beyond BSA. So I think we both have to be responsive to individual school communities that do have their own culture and their own histories, that you have to both listen to student voice in that context and be responsive to that, as well as look at the overarching issues that do span across all schools. And you're right that all schools, that sexual harassment and how to appropriately handle it and create safe spaces for students and for student voice to be heard is something that that is a continuous work in progress across all of our schools. And so ways we do that are during policy consideration of any policy, trying to make sure that we're engaging student voice in that. But this is one in particular, to your point, that we really need to make sure that we are really effectively engaging students in that conversation. And so we, as a regular process, we update policies like the sexual harassment policy, and we recently did just do amendments to that policy. But as part of this process, if we ascertain that there are challenges with it or things that we want to modify, then we would open up the policy again and include students in giving that feedback.
Brittany is next, and then Nina, I'll come back to you after Brittany.
Hi, I'm going to use my computer. I was logged in with my hand raised on my phone, so I'm just going to leave from that. So I came in a little late, so if you've already addressed this, I will not be offended if you say so. And I see it's being recorded, so I'm not sure if that'll be accessible to us later. But I as a parent, I'm a parent of a ninth grader who has not had the opportunity to be on campus yet. And one of the things that I found most disappointing was that the language was so very strong in relation to students, but not faculty. These students talk really specifically about staff and faculty members who mocked them, who laughed in their faces, who gave just really terrible responses to them. And I would say that although I do believe that consequences for these young men are necessary, so much of this would not have happened if teachers and administrators had killed it immediately and not allowed this culture to persist where students believe this is okay. I heard another parent mention that some of these things are the things that we dealt with when we were in school. And I do remember, you know, being in high school and having to deal with certain things, but I don't remember my high school experience, and I'm speaking just for me, not my entire school, being as violent. I don't remember it necessarily being that. So I know that this is a pervasive issue. I know that these things happen everywhere, but at BSA specifically, the accounts were so violent. The groping and the touching and the pulling into dark corners and the going to teachers and being told, you know, we can call your parents or we can drop this now, or being told that your only option is to not go to classes where you your abuser is located. Like, so my question is, I know that I've seen in the chat a mention of restorative justice training, but I've seen a couple things here, namely, of course, sexual assault and harassment training. But also I've seen a mention from a number of young Black girls, and I don't know if this has been mentioned, that they are singled out. That they are singled out because of the way their bodies look naturally. And as the parent of a Black girl who will be on campus, hopefully in just a few months, this is a problem for me. And I have not heard this addressed or seen this addressed specifically. And so if it was before I came on, I apologize. But if not, I would like that to be addressed as well. So my question is kind of twofold. In your training for your faculty and staff, first of all, is it going to be mandatory for all faculty and staff? That's what I need to know, because a cohort or a small group doing restorative justice training is not nearly enough, because I need to know that every classroom that my daughter goes into, those teachers are being trained on how to respond to these situations. Because if it escalates before it gets back to me, because of something that a teacher didn't do, we're gonna have a huge problem. Me as a parent, I'm going to be furious at that point. And so I then ask for Black girls who are saying very clearly, because of the way my body looks, and I know this as a Black woman, that this is what we experienced in high school, that we are being targeted, that we are being singled out by these dress code policies. Because here we have a problem that we're focusing on dress code policies instead of focusing on these boys' behavior in the first place, right? If a young girl comes and says, or a woman comes and says that they are being sexually assaulted or harassed, dress code should not even come up in the conversation at all. If there needs to be a separate conversation about dress code policies, that's fine. I don't understand how any faculty member, especially in 2018, 2019, 2020, how any faculty member in this day and age could possibly believe that responding to a concern about sexual assault or harassment, that any mention of a dress code in that policy is acceptable. It is not. And how is it that administration from top down has not made that clear? How is it that that culture has not already been established? So that's one issue for all girls. But then separately for Black girls who are saying very clearly, we're being targeted. Account from one girl who said that she was laughed at in her face and was asked, how could your parents send you to school wearing that? This is coming. How can these girls possibly feel safe? And what is going to happen to address those two issues separately? Does your training include the intersections of marginalized communities? Because what we're talking about now is misogynoir, when we have Black girls who are facing, on top of their gender and sexual identity or whatever, on top of those things as being a gender thing, now we have when racism comes into play, and we have girls who are being targeted simply for how their bodies look. Because if a dress or a shirt or a pair of pants falls differently on a certain body, and those girls are being targeted for that, how is that going to be addressed? So I said a lot, but I'll bring it to summarize. How are we addressing how racism intersects here? And if not, are you going to come up with a plan to address that? And then how are you going to address your faculty and staff being comprehensively trained on how to respond to these situations?
Chief, would you like for me to jump in?
Sure, and then I'll jump in after I had a couple of thoughts, but please, Dr. Durant.
Certainly. Good evening, all. I'm Tracy Durant. I'm the Executive Director in the Office of Equity. And so Miss or Mrs. McNeil, I won't be able to respond to everything that you said, but some of the latter points I would like to say, for those who don't know, we did have an equity policy adopted in 2019, and we are very much still in the implementation of that policy. But one of the things that you call it is a racial equity policy, and so some of what you talked about in terms of just like the intersection of how race impacts all of those other things are certainly things that we're talking about. We're talking about what happens in marginalized communities. We're talking about mistrust and distrust and systems of oppression. I raise that because some of what you are talking about, specifically as it relates to girls of color, in particular Black girls, there is this over-sexualization and there is this adultification, and in many ways there's also like criminalization. And we're actually hosting a screening of Push Out, the documentary that talks about the push out of Black girls in school. So we are trying to do this throughout the entire organization. To answer the question about what's mandatory, what's not, it's a seminar that we are hosting throughout the district. It is required for our senior leaders. It is required for people at the school-based level, and we will have equity teams that will be helping to support the development and the learning of people on the ground. Now, that said, I want to be very clear, both in my role and as a parent and as the mother of a Black girl. I want to be very clear that anytime we have situations, and I've read the Instagram posts, and so I know some of the things that the young people have shared, to include girls and males and people who are non-binary. So this is, there's a heavy emphasis certainly on the number of students who identified as young women who've told their stories. We also had males on that page that have also expressed some concern. And we have a lot of things to do by way of culture. The kinds of comments that I've heard in terms of, if someone reports something and is talking about anything about the way they're dressed or the way their clothes hit them or any of those kinds of things, those things are not actually about the student. Those things are actually about the gaze of adults, right? That is the gaze of adults. If you are sexualizing a child, that is based on your gaze. It is not based on how that child is built or what they have on. Those are cultural things, to Chief Davis's point and Chief Perkins Cohen's point about work that we have to do across the organization. And so we are working towards those things, Mrs. Neal. I'm not sure if that helped with some of your points, but I would just leave that there.
It does. I'm just wondering specifically, and I know that this will be a process, and I saw someone in the chat ask how parents can be involved, and I'm actually very interested in that because between this and the racism page last year, I'm just like, my daughter has not had an opportunity to even be on campus yet, and I'm wondering if I need to send her there. And I know as a parent and as a Black woman that these are issues that are everywhere, but I would like to know is if there will be communication to all BSA and BCPSS stakeholders that address this issue, right? Because to me, one of my favorite podcasters often says words mean things. You have to say a thing. And there was so much communication about the students' behavior, which again, important, but not nearly, and no strong communication about the behavior of faculty and staff. And these kids are saying over and over and over that they've been made to feel unsafe by those who are charged with their care in that space, right? Not just by their peers. Because we all know that suspending these boys and even if it wasn't just boys and men, no matter who would engage in this behavior, gender aside, as far as abusers or victims, we know that suspending them, that's not going to solve the problem. The bigger issue is culture, and the bigger issue is faculty and staff. So I'm just wondering, why was the language so strong as it related to the students' interaction, but not strong at all, and really barely even touching on administrators and teachers and how it was handled there, when we all know that if the teachers and administrators had handled this differently, we might not even be on this call right now. So I'm just wondering if moving forward, will there be communication that makes it clear to the entire community, parents, students, and staff and faculty, but also clear and direct communication to your employees that this kind of behavior will not be accepted from the adults in this situation, because it's been made clear that you're going to address the students, and I believe you will, and I hope actually for restorative justice more than anything, because I don't want things to be overly punitive, although I will say that I don't know if anything could be overly punitive from a victim's standpoint, so I want to be sensitive there. But I'm just wondering, will there be communication moving forward that like says as strongly as the communication we've already heard that faculty and staff dropped the ball, and moving forward it won't be accepted, and these are the things that we're going to do to make sure that that's not the case? Because I mean, I think it's kind of dishonest to act like these things are being addressed when none of it has been said to the community. And the kids are saying over and over and over that even from their perspective, they don't feel safe and they don't feel protected. And it's not just their peers, it is those who are charged, you know, in that space with their care and to make them safe.
Yes, as we look over and review all the cases, when we summarize it for the community, if there are changes that we have to make, then we will let people know that. So I think that's part of what you were saying. I think the other
How is it if, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I'm frustrated, so I want to be very clear with my words, right? Not an if. It can't be an if. We know there are changes that have to be made. And I know that you guys are in your official positions. There are certain things that you have to say and certain things that you cannot say. When this is over, though, are you really going to wait until this is over to say that? Like, I don't understand that. I just don't understand how we can continue to see these posts go up on social media and not address that now. How can you not address that? These kids are saying they're not safe, and they still have to interact with these people, even in virtual schooling. Some of them are on campus. How do you not address that now? You had no problem addressing what these students have done. And I know that teachers deserve some fair process and they deserve, but I'm sorry, I'm going to let others speak. I want to just drive that home because I'm not hearing enough about it. I'm not seeing enough about it. And I don't think it's nearly enough to wait until the end of this process when these kids have to right now go to school and be in places with faculty and staff who have failed them. And even if it's not the faculty and staff who have failed them, a message needs to be sent to all those who are there, whether it be virtual in person, that there has to be a difference in how they handle anything that is coming to them right now. Because my daughter still logs on every day right now. And I know there are children who are going into that building every day right now. So there needs to be some thought. There was no problem sending out a letter saying, this is what we're going to do to students. And you have not done that regarding the adults that we are putting our children into their care. And so what is the right now? And if you can't answer that right now, I would much rather you say, I'm sorry, we didn't think about it, but we will, and come out with something rather than make excuses for it, because it's just unacceptable.
Thank you, Ms. McNeil. Sydney, I see your hand up, but I think that was a previous hand.
Can I say something?
Yeah, and then I was going to get to Nina, I think.
I don't have a question. I have a request. So I want to add on to what Brittany said very well, and earlier, young lady, Flenon Grace. It's something that we can do right now. The culture needs to be changed right now. And there's something that doesn't have to be required by policies. It's something we can do as normal human beings. Teachers need to speak to the students and make it clear that this is not okay. In every class, there is an abuser sitting right there, and everyone knows it and no one mentions it. And this is why it goes on. This is why it goes on. Because the kids laugh, teachers don't say anything, and then they keep on doing this because there are no immediate consequences. And I'm not talking about punitive consequences like, you know, being suspended, this or that. I just want peer pressure in which it's in making, in which people, the culture is such that it is clear to these people that this is not acceptable behavior. And I don't know about all the cases that happened, and I'm sure you will do something about this, but this is something that can be done right now. There is no required policy. If you have 5 kids and they're misbehaving, you round them up and tell them this is not okay. Everyone needs to not do this. So that's what you need to do. And this is an obligation of the teachers to make the classroom a safe place. I teach myself, and if anything happens, I kick that person out of the class and tell them you're not coming back until you can treat everyone with respect. And this is what is not happening right now. And students feel this, they see this, they hear this silence. So even when the teachers are not openly mean to them, which apparently also happened, the silence speaks loudly. It speaks loudly that this is just being overlooked and it's just a joke. And if someone tells you I will rape you, it's just a joke. You know, how many times did you have to choose your outfit based on whether some 15-year-old jerk will tell you you're giving him an erection? Did this ever happen to you? These girls have to live with this every day, and boys probably need to hear this. Boys don't need to hear this either. So teachers have the obligation to tell the students right now, tomorrow, in class, with the guy present who's been doing this, this is not okay, we can't do this. In the film program, they have conversations with the students, personal conversations, one-on-one, and this is a perfect opportunity to talk to every child and tell them, do not laugh at these jokes. This is not funny. Rape jokes are not funny. So this is an immediate action that doesn't require policies, I don't think. This is something that we just should understand that we need to do as humans. And teachers should just be told, if they don't realize they should be doing this, you should tell them you need to address this because your students need to feel safe.
Thank you so much, Nina. I know I'm butting in, but you just addressed the exact same issue that I was talking about, in which nobody responded to. I would like someone to tell me in administration a funny rape joke. I challenge you to come up with one. You can't. It doesn't exist. Every student who says it's funny should be suspended.
These should understand that's not funny also. Very clearly.
Things are happening that are excused by the teachers as because it's a joke, and it's not okay. And it teaches the kids that hurting each other and sexual assault is funny, and it's not okay.
The problem is I recognize the names from this program here, and these are all from people who already know that rape jokes are not funny. The ones who don't know this are not here. That's the problem.
Hey, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to know if any of the mandatory reporters who are sitting here in the admin have seen the students publicly accusing faculty of sexual harassment in the chat. You should read the chat. Your students are publicly accusing Mr. Ford of sexual harassment. And if you're a mandatory reporter,
we understand. There's been a number of things that have been said on this call, and we'll follow up as we need to. I think that was Mr. Garasso. Ruth, you have your hand up again?
Yes, I have a few things. One, I do want to let everyone know that we have filed formal complaints to North Avenue. We have reached out to everyone who has submitted their story on our account and asked them to file an official complaint. Everyone who was comfortable with doing so did that. We have not received any response in relation to those. We have asked our followers if they have received any word from North Avenue or the school about these investigations, and every single person said no. These are the people who are named. These are the people who are named, because we understand that you can't possibly investigate the anonymous cases because you don't know who's making those allegations. But the people who are named have said, no, we have not been contacted by North Avenue or the school. My second thing is, I do have to say, it's very, very funny to me how Dr. Ford is not saying anything, despite the fact that he is the director of the school. My third thing is, Mr. Ford's not saying anything, despite the fact that he is being accused as well, several times on the account and several times in the chat. My fourth thing, there's a lot of things, just warning you. But my fourth thing is, you guys keep saying, oh, we are going to take this very seriously. We're going to come up with a plan. We're going to care about this. We're going to investigate. But how? Because I'm a very detail-oriented person. I need plans. I need facts. And you guys are not giving those to us. My next thing is, how on earth are you guys going to create a policy that will protect the students without consulting the students? Because the first day I made the page, I sent an email to Dr. Ford and I said, I do not care if I have to form a committee. I don't care if I have to send you plans. I am currently drafting some stuff. So don't think that this is the last you're hearing from me. And that is a threat. But how on earth are you going to create a policy that protects the students without consulting the students? Because we've seen this happen with the racial training. How are you going to educate the staff on how to not be racist to the students without consulting the students? So how are you going to make the staff not harass kids, not mistreat the kids without consulting the kids? Because I just want a logical answer and y'all are not giving that to me. So tell me.
So go ahead, Allison.
Well, I'll just start. So, I mean, the advisory group we're talking about would be including students. So that is one of the things we're doing to include students, is to make sure.
Why has no one been contacted about that?
Because we honestly just started it, and it may come across as late and slow, and I'll take that feedback, but it is going to take some time. And I realize that, you know, it's easy to roll your eyes that it's going to take time, or that folks don't necessarily, you know, it doesn't look like we're caring. But if people are hurting, as they have been, and as we've seen it on the Instagram page, then we're going to follow up. And I know that our teams are going to follow up with anyone that has put in a complaint.
It's nice that like you're saying these things, but they don't actually seem to be happening. I mean, you said that you're going to follow up, but clearly you haven't done that. Second of all, if you're creating a group that is supposed to like that involves students, I mean, shouldn't reaching out to students be the exact thing that you do first? I don't know why that, out of all things, would be the last thing to come up. That to me doesn't make sense.
So today's meeting is part of reaching out to the community to hear back from students and engage them in this conversation about how we move forward. So that is part of what we're doing today. Some of the reaching out to students that we've done through letters and asking people to file reports. And I hear you, Ruth, in indicating that those students have not been heard from yet, but your meeting with the Title IX officer yesterday was one step in that process, as well as the follow-up meetings will happen with those students to make sure we're getting their information. There is the immediate information, the immediate kind of context I think that we have to address is about creating a safe place in the school community that Nina and others have talked about. How do you create a safe place in the school community? And there's also the longer term. In the immediate case, it's getting input from things like, there's been a lot of discussion on the Instagram page about unsafe places in the school, like the stairwell. So how do we make that safe? There is conversation about, so in terms of students who are in classrooms that you're talking about, trying to understand the meaning of that. If there are students who were involved in prior situations, we do need to make sure that what we are doing is making sure that there was appropriate consequences. And if there were, right now, as far as we know, there were consequences in the cases that we are aware of, the ones that we have seen. So we are reviewing those to make sure that they were appropriate. If they were appropriate, then students need to feel safe now, but that does not mean that you permanently are holding students accountable who had an appropriate action at the time of the offense, whatever it was. So how do we make sure the students feel safe? And to your point, that students understand what is appropriate in class and what is supportive of other students and what is humiliating or degrading or threatening to other students in terms of language. So we do need to do that. So I was a little bit confused about if we're talking about the context and dialogue within courses, or if we're talking about past actions. So we are trying to do both. We're trying to make sure that the past actions that occurred, the past events, and the actions that followed up were appropriate. And then in classes, making sure that, yes, if students are using inappropriate language that are dehumanizing other students, that are victimizing other students, that has to be addressed too, that is addressed in the moment in the classroom. So we have to do both. And then partly in terms of the setup of this meeting, there were concerns raised about this, about staff. We saw that on the Instagram page. That's why we talked about the investigation is going to look at the cases that occurred and whether the way they were handled was appropriate. So there was a lot of concerns raised about how students were interacted with in the follow-up to it. So was that handled appropriately? And then were the actions taken afterwards appropriate. So in that context, we thought to create a safe place for people to respond today, it made sense to have people outside the school community so people would feel safe to raise concerns to us in this environment. That's why we have been leading the meeting from the central office to give you people space to raise concerns and not have to say that to the school community. If that is where you want, if that's those are the individuals about whom you want to raise concerns. We want to create safe space for that.
Okay, so you said the investigation is going to look at these things, but yesterday when Sydney and I met with Jane from the Title IX office, she said that the investigation has already begun. And John Davis said that you guys are just coming up with the idea to include it in students in the advisory committee. But last week during the parent meeting, as far as we were told that the board was already formed. So which is true? Is the investigation already ongoing, or are you just planning on starting it? And was the board already created, or are you just saying that you're just planning it? Because the information that we're receiving from the different adults are not adding up.
The investigation has started. The advisory committee, the chairs I just spoke with the chairs in the last few days. So that's just beginning. I know there's also been a lot of people with their hands up. I would ask people not to butt in. I probably haven't facilitated that well, and I'm glad some people have called me out on that. Let's allow other people to speak as well. I think it's Iana Kane.
Hi, Ayana Kane, class of 23. First, I want to start by saying that I have not been a victim of sexual assault or sexual harassment at the school, and I'm speaking on behalf of friends of mine who feel as though they cannot speak for themselves. In no way do I want to take the light away from any of the people here trying to speak for their own, trying to speak for themselves, but I'm only speaking as a person that wants change and that never wants to be put in a position where this will ever happen to me or anyone else around me. Let me open up my little questions. I've been having my hand up for a while now. As a student of this school, it is evident that not only the issue is around the code of conduct, it's about the code of conduct not being enforced, if that makes sense. I don't think that it's like there is an issue with the code of conduct and how we have it implemented. As we all see, it's not working. I feel like, I don't want to say her name wrong, Fanon. I feel like she expressed the fact that if it's not working, we need to change it. It's not only just the code of conduct that we need to change, it's the fact that it's not being enforced. My computer's acting really slow. My question overall is, well, yeah, let me start with this. The page, the Survivors of BSA Instagram page talked a lot about the specific staff member, a specific staff member being sneaky, meaning that they're trying to go by their own rules or being involved, or before actually involving the code of conduct, trying to sweep it under the rug. So if there is another issue with a staff member not taking the proper steps to report a sexual assault or harassment case, we would then, like my question is, would we then have to go to North Avenue to report it to them? Is it the email that we have to go to contact?
You should be able to do any of those. And as mandated reporters, there has to be follow-up. I think your question was, what if there isn't follow-up? Then yes, you should tell someone else, right? I mean, yes, if you don't think there is follow-up, then go the other way. I mean, I'll just say it the way I want to say it, which is email jldavis@bcps, right? Email me if you have to. I mean, I do have faith in the people that are in the Department of Fair Practices that they are gonna follow up. So let me be clear about that. But if for some reason something hasn't been followed up, you can email me. You can email some of the other leaders on here as well.
I do have another question. I'll be really brief. We know that it's not only starting in high school. This issue does not start in high school. People don't come to high school and just think to sexually harass or assault somebody. That being said, that there has been years of this being probably taught. Middle school, for instance, I've been in the Baltimore City Public Schools for practically my whole entire life. Middle school, elementary school, I've been there, done it. And there has been sexual harassment and sexual assault that has happened in these middle schools, even elementary schools, unfortunately. Speaking not just on high schools, but what other, sorry, I'm choking over my words. What other like activities or not activities, somebody help me with this word, please. But what other programs, yes, thank you, Ms. Providence. What other programs will we implement for younger students to be educated on these topics? I have younger siblings that are in these classes or in these grades, and I'm terrified. Brittany, she said this before. I have a younger sister, she's a Black girl, and I don't want her in any way when she goes to middle school to have to be approached with being treated with disrespect, sexually harassed, sexually assaulted. How are we going to implement these policies and teaching younger students how to navigate through these issues? Because me speaking from a child's perspective, when I was younger, I would not want to be interrogated in a room with the police or having police involved. Yes, Twig students, Kaya. I was also a Twig. I just would like to know where the guidance will be for younger students. Thank you.
No, thank you, because it's a great question. I think part of it is in our health curriculum, but I'm not going to say that that settles it. I don't think that that's enough. Definitely based on what I'm hearing and from this question, you're right. A lot of this, I shouldn't say a lot of this, but this can definitely begin in middle school or even younger, quite frankly. And I think your question is a good one that I can't answer right away. But I'm going to have to. Christopher, you've also had your hand up for a while, I believe.
Yes, sir. How are you, Chief Davis? This is Christopher Jones. I'm a teacher at Dallas F. Nicholas Elementary. Allison and Tracy have made great points. The children obviously have made great points. The students, the parents have made great points. And a lot of things that are centered around the staff. I thought to myself, I was a part of a school turnaround at James McHenry Elementary. I was wondering, is there any consideration to possibly zero basing the staff and just kind of literally starting over and bringing in staff members that would obviously bring in a new culture the same way you would do you did at James McHenry, the same way you did at Harlem Park, just to kind of change the culture completely, just kind of, you know, the process that went there where everyone basically has to be rehired to the position, and it would kind of weed out the ones who are not able to adjust to this culture change that I agree needs to happen right now. I have a daughter, Essence Jones, who will be attending in school next year. And I think if she doesn't have to deal with the culture or any residue of leftover culture and kind of start fresh with people who understand that this is not acceptable behavior on any level, that would definitely make a change for not only her, but every other student at BSA. So is there any consideration to possibly zero basing the staff if the staff is such a big problem that we're hearing from students? If the culture of people who have been there, I don't know how long, but if they're so much of a problem or issue, could we potentially zero base and start over, bring in new teachers who understand what's appropriate?
Are you watching Maria react?
No.
So zero basing is always an option, but it is not something that we've considered right now. I haven't heard that question really about any school for a minute. So I would say right now that's not on the table. I don't want to lie to you and act like we've been talking about that, because we haven't. But I appreciate your question, and obviously you've seen what that has done positively in some places in the past. Octavia?
Yes, hi. So I sort of had two questions. One was, sometimes when people have tried to sort of, you know, a problem has existed for a long time. I'm a parent of a potential incoming 9th grader. And at first I was super excited to go to BSA, and now we've sort of wondered if this school is the right place, because I have invested in my child. I have been there. I have shown up. I have protected my child in every possible way. And so I'm not going to throw my child in an environment in which for the first time in you know, their lives, they're not going to be also similarly cared for by the people who were supposed to be in charge of them. So that's sort of like an overarching concern that I have. So the two things that I want to say is that sometimes when groups within themselves, they know they have a problem and they haven't been able to create change, there are outside groups that Baltimore City Public Schools can work with. There may be experts on best practices in high schools, not just talking to the students, but also experience from other schools who've had similar problems and what they've been able to institute and how it's sort of changed and affected policy and culture and things like that. The second thing is, I think addressing the issue of culture changes in school really needs to be done immediately. And there are also experts on that who know how to, short of or not waiting for zeroing staff, who know how to come into an organization and help transition the culture. Anybody who's ever been to like a sleepaway camp or something like that, they study this. They know how, when you bring in a group of new people, or even people who've come before, how you create a sort of culture and how you share the values of the organization in a particularly quick sort of way. And they have like very intensive training and things like that. And I understand that there are budgetary restrictions. I understand I've worked in government most of my life, so I understand the sort of limitations that you feel that you have to work within. But I think that when you know that you have a big problem, that you need to change the culture dramatically, you have to act in a different way. And so it just may be time that you all don't have the right people on your teams to affect this kind of change across schools. And it's sort of time out to keep saying, well, we've done this, or we are thinking about this, or we may or may not enact this sort of thing, but to say, okay, we realize that we have a real problem. We have people's precious children. And I know that I, as a parent, if there was some parent education that you wanted me to be a part of, if there were, you have these mandatory meetings or whatever on, or you have some sort of meetings, I think every month or something like that. If you had sort of training information, reaching out to sort of parents so that we could start for the parents who are not doing it, because I know I'm doing it. I'm teaching my kid at home. I don't expect my kid to go to school and be acting a fool and make other children's lives difficult. But short of that, there are things that there's just change that needs to happen like yesterday. And I think that in all the ways that you've tried before, you have revised the policy that apparently nobody knew existed in the first place. You've revised the policy that the school wasn't working and doing anyway. They weren't following those procedures anyway. So it may be time for something radical. It may be time to bring in experts who may not be in the school system already. And it may be cheaper to pay for these experts than lawsuits from families and children who could potentially be victimized and who have already been victimized within the school system. That's all that I have to say.
I'll give a
Thank you, Ms. Shulman.
Yeah, I was just going to add, yes, if we think we need to bring in someone to help out with the culture in the school, then we can do that. That should be an option, yes. Robin?
I'm sorry, thank you. I'm glad to see so many people from our community in this important meeting. I want to thank the brave students who were able to bring this to our attention and to get such movement. And I'm very proud that you all are shaping our community. I've been listening to this meeting since we started around 5:30. I'm not really sure that this meeting is giving us what we need or what the purpose is. We don't have an agenda. I don't think, with all due respect, that the people who are in such high leadership positions on North Avenue are in a position to guide us through this. My love for BSA is dear. I have a daughter in BSA currently. I have a student who finished Twigs. I've been involved in the community. I'm heartbroken when any child is in the pain that they are in. There are so many systematic issues that are going to continue to spiral now that the Pandora's box is open. We're talking about having children people revisit trauma. They're going to be dealing with legal situations, police situations, counseling. We don't have the resources at this table alone to handle where we're going. And changes need to be made, not just in curriculum. We're smart people. The systems are so broken and people do not have the knowledge how to navigate this. And to make changes for the victims and for students not to experience this now and in the future, we don't have the people at the table to do this. We wouldn't be here at this level if we had the resources and support. And with all due respect again to the administrators who are here, you've guided us through some other big things. This isn't it. We need the resources and the foundation to do something important. The school needs to have a structure in place. And I don't know if it's talking to a third party and spending the money both from the school foundation and from the city and the state level. This is such a crisis. And this is small. The PR part of it is really important too, not just because of reputation. And that's not even important to me, but the trauma that continues to grow because of how the PR and the communications have and have not rolled out are so significant. So there are too many things happening in this moment, and it is not fair to the victims and the families and the students, and students don't want to come here because of this issue. So I implore to you to pause and say this is bigger than what we know what to do, and get some resources in here on all levels of counseling, for legal, for trauma, for support. This is just way too big for where we are right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brody. Tristan?
Hello, I am a current sophomore, and I had two brothers who both went here and graduated a couple years back. And the main issue that I'm having here is that these are things that I have heard from them, and repeatedly, it's kind of thing that you would bring up over dinner, saying, you know, oh, this has been reported again, or this has occurred again. And my question is we know that this has been going on for years. And I've heard from my brothers when I was going to BSA, you know, this is going to be, this is an issue that you might hear about, and it's prevalent in the dance department. And we literally knew this for years, and everybody knew it. The staff knew it, the teachers, everybody on the teachers, faculty, everything like that. The students knew it, and nothing was done about it. And the fact that it has to get to the point where two students have to use social media in order to alert the district in order to have action taken is ridiculous. So my question is, how in the future are we going to prevent this kind of thing from happening? Because yes, we are having this excellent flare-up now where there's all this attention, but why is this happening? How is this going to be prevented in the future? Because we'll have this big investigation now, maybe some changes will be put into place, but is there going to be monitoring? Are we going to have independent inspectors who are going to come into the schools, and not just BSA, every single city school needs to be maybe inspected yearly or twice yearly to make sure that they are following these practices, and to make sure that this is still not happening where students are speaking out and being ignored or completely rejected. So are we going to have some kind of independent auditing, and how regularly is it going to occur? Is this even something you've considered? That kind of answer would be wonderful.
Christian, it's another good question. What I have thought through personally is sexual harassment or sexual assault cases. There is a process for them, and we talked briefly about that. But what I heard in that is there should be more, and there should be more monitoring of those, because one of the parts to this is it's not just is it handled through a code of conduct, but is it handled sensitively? Is it part of the culture? Is it something that that the adults are working actively against? and it's a hard thing to monitor, Tristan. But that is what I get from that comment, and that is something that I feel strongly about, that I also have to figure out so that it doesn't get to this point that you just mentioned. I'm not going to sit there that I have some great answer for an audit or something that would alleviate this. But there does have to be something, and I also believe that the student voice piece, it can't get to this place. It has to be illuminated way earlier, and I've got to help schools with that, and so do the people that work with schools every day. That's not something that's going to happen overnight, but I do want to make sure you know I hear that, and to a large degree agree with it. Autumn?